This is Side Effects by Janice. He was whipping down an old two-lane, engine roaring, wind strong enough to rattle his teeth, the leather jacket glued to his shoulders. A powerful vibration ran up his wrists and across his chest, where it fused with a different frequency surging up off the points of his hips. Then a farm tractor pulled out ahead of him. In the last uncomplicated moment of his life, Carl twitched the handles and crossed the double line. He never remembered anything else. Later, they told him about an oncoming car and a swerve back into his lane, which ended when the big Harley left the road, ended up in a brush-filled ditch with gas everywhere. He'd flown another 12 feet, which saved his life when the fire started. He'd been lucky that a passing trucker had radioed almost immediately for the rescue chopper. They told him all this. He could imagine the black skid of hot rubber, sudden loss of orientation, the bundle of bone and flesh, and denim, the leather flying doll-like through the air, even the flash and the heat and the crackling branches of sudden fire. But he couldn't remember. He woke up to whiteness, faint shadows, the slow-moving blades of a fan, and discovered other worries. He could hear a cart rattling, purposeful footsteps, low voices. From the penetrating medicinal smell, Carl guessed he was in a hospital. He decided he'd better see what was what before Paula got worried. When he tried to look at his watch, his arm failed to respond. He tried to roll over and swing his legs to the side of the bed. Nothing happened. Carl saw nothing but the white ceiling, plain walls, and the corner of a window, and started to scream. The nurse was tall, fair, and middle-aged. She brought a shot, some water in a paper cup, an air of calm. "Sorry," she said. "We've been watching you, but we thought you'd be out for a while longer. It's always a shock." Carl told her how much of a shock with all the vocabulary at his command. The nurse was undisturbed. She patted his shoulder. "Language center's undamaged? That's a good sign. We'll have you right in no time. Not like the old days. They're culturing the spinal replacement cells right now." Paula told him the same thing when she arrived in a warm cloud of scent with flowers and tears. "Dr. Petrus is a genius," she said. Her thick dark hair brushed Carl's face as she kissed him. "All clean fetal tissue. Reknitting the spinal cord is the next thing to routine." That was what Dr. Petrus said, too. Tall and thin to the point of emaciation, the doctor elaborated on the technique which was standard practice now, really a brilliant development. He said Carl didn't know how lucky he was. "How soon?" Carl asked. Lying motionless was already precipitating acute anxiety. "You'll thank me for not rushing," Dr. Petrus said. "There's been, damage, you understand. The break in your left leg is pretty bad. You know when you can feel the pain. And abrasions, hairline rib fractures. You'd thought he was doing Carl a favor. But the cultures were proceeding perfectly. The transplant would be ready within a week." The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the cells that were to reknit his spinal cord had been implanted. Carl woke that morning feeling lousy, his head throbbing. The patterns on Paula's green silk dress writhed like a nest of snakes, and he vomited his breakfast onto the tray that was fixed just under his chin. Petrus seemed concerned when he made his rounds, and by the following day it was apparent that infection had set in. The transplant would have to be scrapped. "We can start again," Dr. Petrus told Carl, though there was some damage, some cleaning up to do. The cleaning up required an emergency run to the operating room, IV bags attached to every vein in sight, and a midnight visit from a massive, unhealthy-looking man in a surgeon's green scrub suit. He sat for a long time without speaking. Even after Carl opened his eyes, the visitor remained silent, his massive jowls glistening, his small, light eyes quick and alert in their fat pouches. "I'm dying," Carl said, half statement, half question. His visitor shrugged slightly. "Not yet," he said. "It is a matter of time." His voice was neutral and unconcerned. "A matter of time," Carl repeated. In his heavily drugged state, it was the phrasing that struck him. Cases of this sort, the surgeon made a gesture that dropped below Carl's restricted field of vision. "We have not unlimited power over the body. New techniques come with their own complications." "I'm going to die in a matter of time," Carl said. "As are we all," The surgeon bent his head to look at something in Carl's chart. How much time depends in part on you. I've come to make you a proposition. Once again, the doctor's expression seemed odd. Am I hallucinating? Carl asked. No. I'm Harold Bourja, head of neurosurgery. A clean, broad hand drifted into Carl's vision, landed on his brow, and stroked his head gently. There is a new procedure which may enable us to remove the infected tissue and restore your spinal column rapidly enough to preserve your life and restore mobility. Arms and legs, Carl asked. He seemed incapable of grasping complex ideas. If we are successful, you will be as good as new physically, minus the broken leg and cracked ribs, of course. Of course, said Carl. Why, he wondered, hadn't they done this sooner? Unlike the standard treatment, this procedure requires a donor, a decent tissue match, speed, and decisiveness. I'm already decided, Carl said. I lost a patient tonight, the surgeon continued with glacial slowness. A young person of the correct tissue type. They do not come along every day, you know. Can you perform the surgery right away? Carl asked. Will have to be done immediately, if you agree. Dr. Bourge's hand rose like a mysterious warning flipper. Naturally, there are dangers. This is delicate and difficult experimental surgery. I cannot guarantee success. Then I would die quickly, Carl said. You would die on the table. I want to see Paula, Carl said. Then I would like you to give it a try. There is another thing, which perhaps you and your companion should discuss. We think there may be side effects of a psychological nature. You think? So far, we've only attempted this procedure in animals. One subject is a cat I now keep as a pet. Quite a charming animal, perfectly healthy. She was retired from the laboratory for her services to science. Though I cannot be sure, I believe there are side effects, he nodded his massive head, involving the brain. So does death, said Carl. Please don't wait any longer. This time, when Carl came out of the anesthesia, he woke to pain, to a cast on one leg, tape on his ribs, and a horrifying headache. How are you feeling, darling? Paula asked. She leaned over his bed and stroked his face, and for an instant, Carl was surprised by the inky blackness of her hair. How dark your hair is, he said. All the better, she said, teasing, and ran the fluffy end of the braid across his lips. Has Papa come? He asked. Paula's face went still. She'd never heard Carl refer to his late father as Papa. He warned me about that truck, Carl mumbled, although talking was suddenly an enormous effort. He said it wasn't worth. Rest now, said Paula. They're going to give you a shot. For 2 days, Carl existed in a formless swirl of pain that receded as suddenly as it had arisen, leaving him weak and contented high on a hospital bed near an open window. He felt the sunshine, smelled a faint breeze tinged with exhaust fumes, a diesel somewhere. He heard the sounds of engines passing on the street, recognized most of them without being surprised that a whole area of existence had become comprehensible. He smelled perfume, too. His imagination floated away to a shuttered bedroom, Paula's tanned limbs, a surge of erotic delight. He pulled himself up into a sitting position. His ribs hurt. The back of his neck throbbed softly. His legs itched under its plaster cast. But he was moving. He really was moving. When Paula stood up from the chair on the other side of the bed, he began to weep with joy. A very good recovery, Dr. Petrus announced 2 weeks later when Carl was being discharged. Not a sign of infection. Not a trace of tissue rejection. Immune system perfect. Leg looks good. Ribs feel okay? A bit stiff. That will last for a while, Petrus said. No heavy lifting, remember. Just math papers, come September. And no motorcycle. We have a car, Paula said quickly. The bike was recreation. No motorcycle, Carl said. Indeed, he had no feeling for the bike one way or the other now. The exhilarating rush of speed, the blur as telephone poles and trees whipped past his vision, the hypnotic unwinding spool of asphalt. He knew those things only as he knew the location of the hospital, the capital of Alaska, the author of Moby Dick. Motorcycling was now just theoretical knowledge. Engines, however, were another matter. Paula started the Escort, and before the motor was warm, Carl said, "That carburetor needs adjustment. I'll take a look when I get home." "You don't know anything about carburetors," Paula said. "Last time he had the hood up was to signal the AAA man." Carl said nothing. He was digesting two incompatible truths. He knew nothing about mechanics. In fact, he'd known embarrassingly little even about his motorbike. He now heard engines the way a musician hears Mozart. He knew, too, when he opened the hood of the Ford, its configuration would fit his mental diagram exactly. "It's all right," Paula said, reaching over to pat his leg. "I'm just a bit tense. Been so worried. Now that you're finally coming home, I'm ready to collapse." Carl squeezed her hand. "I'm not looking forward to the stairs," he said. He envisioned a big triple-decker with steep old mahogany stairs and a dark apartment that smelled of tomatoes, peppers, and onions cooking. "You won't have to go into school right away," Paula said, and at her voice the stairs shifted from worn mahogany to wide cement with steel railings, bright red trim, echoing noise and bustle of the passing bell. Their own house, when Paula pulled into the drive, proved to be a tidy gray ranch with blue shutters and severely pruned vegetation growing on either side of the front stoop. Carl found it familiar, no more so than the other houses in the neighborhood, less so than the second-floor apartment that kept drifting into his consciousness. Everything felt just a little strange, as if he had returned from a journey so immensely long and distant, even home seemed foreign. "You're tired," Paula said, and Carl admitted that the ride home had exhausted him. "You have to expect a certain amount of disorientation." She used that term several times in the days that followed. He was disoriented when he took the wrong turn to the bathroom, when he asked about Uncle Andy, when he worried who was looking after his old dog. One night they sat down with a photo album, which straightened him out on the relatives and friends, which left him oddly depressed and lonely. He'd never had a dog. Uncle Andy was a figment of his imagination. His father, who had left the family 20 years before, had been dead 6 years. When it was all clear to him, he felt as if half his circle of friends had died at once, and grief, none the less sharp for being touched with unreality, ate into his soul. Paula felt or hoped that this was disorientation. Carl, meanwhile, looked at her anxious eyes, her smooth, pretty face, slightly upturned nose, straight brown, full lips, realized that he didn't love her. They had lived together happily for nearly 5 years. Until the accident, Carl would have said that he was in love with her. He saw now that he'd been mistaken. In his 32 years, he had never been in love. But now he knew love, or remembered love, he was not sure which, and the object of this elusive, exhilarating, and painful emotion was not Paula. He was sure of that. Though he desired Paula, liked her, felt immense gratitude toward her, he was not in love with her, not at all, and that certainty began to complicate his life. When he went back for his last checkup with Dr. Petrus, Carl asked if he might meet the donor family to thank them. This was not allowed, Dr. Petrus said. It was distressing for them. In the past there had been some messy situations. But a letter could be forwarded. Organ donor families always appreciated a letter. Carl dutifully produced one, and spent a day in the library reading back obits and accident reports from the local paper. There were not too many possibilities. An Alzheimer's patient in the local nursing home, a child burned to death in a trailer fire, a hunting accident, an out-of-state drowning. Then there was Angela O'Neill, 21, automobile mechanic. Carl felt his chest tighten as soon as he saw the name. O'Neill's obituary had run the day after Carl's successful transplant, and the story of his accident had appeared the day before. The young mechanic had been crushed when a truck he was repairing slipped off its jack. He had suffered massive internal injuries and died on the operating table. Carl's hand shook and his pen skipped awkwardly across the notepad. From the description of his injuries, Angelo O'Neill seemed the best candidate. His family lived on River Street in the South End. And as soon as he reached the area, Carl was assailed by a wash of images and memories, the slippery shock of a football on a cold, wet day, flying down a street with Tony racing after him, the sound of a balky car engine sputtering in a sunny garage, a yellow puppy jumping eagerly against a fence. Carl pulled up and stopped a few houses short of 511, sat for a moment to compose himself. He'd come without any clear idea beyond seeing the neighborhood. Even when he had found Angelo O'Neill's name, he felt that mix of hope and terror. It had been a kind of theoretical hope, an intellectual terror. The reality of the neighborhood was quite different, once utterly familiar and completely foreign. Carl suddenly understood that the age-old fear of ghosts was not perhaps so much the fear of meeting one as of becoming one. At last he forced himself out of the car and started down the sidewalk. The information that the house with the hedge belonged to Cyrillus and the next one to new people, although Tony's grandmother still lived on the bottom floor, dropped into his mind. Tony was apparently a childhood friend. The Cyrillus was just a name. A poster for a soccer match awakened a mysterious excitement. A side porch made his heart jump. Then a linden tree crowded the walk, blocking his vision, and there was the triple family, as solid and ungainly as a galleon, its big shingled porches thrusting exuberantly toward the street. In the narrow yard, an old retriever and a little girl played with a ball under a big rambling grapevine. Though he had no idea who the child was and had forgotten the dog's name, Carl felt an almost unbearable grief. He leaned weakly against the chain-link fence. The uncles had played with a soccer ball in the backyard. Mama had yelled to be careful of the grapevine. And where was she? What had happened to her? Papa had brought out Guinness and sandwiches. "You all right, mister?" the voice asked. Carl heard an edge of suspicion, almost of hostility. A young man, slight and dark, was standing a few yards away with his hands on the gate. Carl shook his head. He realized he'd been standing staring at the child and the dog, suspicious behavior in neighborhoods far safer than River Street. "I've been in the hospital," he said. "Thought I'd take a little walk, but I'm not strong enough." He tapped his left leg. The lightweight plastic gave a soft ping. "Walking cast." The young man was not unsympathetic. "You want a drink of water or something?" No, thanks." Carl felt it would be unbearable to enter the house, to prolong the meeting. "My car's just back there." He gestured toward where he'd left the escort. The young man nodded, probably relieved, and opened the gate. The old dog waddled over, the child bouncing along beside him. Uncle Joey, she cried. He bent down and picked her up. The dog swung his head toward Carl and barked once, twice, then tentatively wagged his tail. As Carl turned away, he heard Joey soothing the dog. Neither name meant anything. He was thankful, deeply thankful. He'd been a fool to come. The street, the house, the dog, the grapevine, those were painful enough. To feel that he knew someone, recognized someone he'd loved, the very thought caused him to tremble. For some time before Carl felt steady enough to drive home. But in spite of the shock and the nauseating and frightening sense of being suspended between two lives, Carl found reasons to drive to the River Street neighborhood. There were soccer games in the big public park every weekend, and Carl felt that walking around the pitches was good for his leg. He found an Italian bakery with all kinds of wonderful pastries, and a German butcher shop that made excellent sausages. When he broke up with Paula and left the Gray Ranch house, he found an apartment a few streets west of River Street, moved in with his records and stereo, his math books, his recliner, and a futon. Gradually, his anomalous situation became familiar. Though he had once feared and anticipated a constant stream of recollection, he never remembered any more of River Street than he had the first day. His knowledge, like his knowledge of cars, which mixed sophisticated information with the dumbest of gaffes, was tantalizingly fragmentary, as full of holes as Swiss cheese. Or rather, it was his, Carl's, memory had been punched full of holes. These strange fragments had come to reside in the cavities. In fact, if it had only been a matter of knowledge, of stray facts and figures, Carl might have managed all right. The O'Neills might gradually have been pushed into a corner of his memory like the inhabitants of some exceptionally vivid movie. What was truly troubling was something else. The sense that he had led a richer, fuller life elsewhere. A life that made him subtly dissatisfied with his present diminished existence. He had a hint of this one day when he found his favorite bakery closed because of a death in the family. Carl decided to try another pastry shop in the neighborhood. With his old-fashioned black marble counter, leather-topped chrome stools, this establishment proved to be larger and considerably more elegant. A stout, dark woman with a faint mustache and a white hairnet was helping another customer when Carl entered. She turned toward the back of the shop and called, "Teresa, out front!" A small, slight girl with short blonde hair tucked behind her ears appeared, wiping the flour from her hands on a towel. "Can I help you?" Her voice was the best thing about her, very soft and sweet, for her features were plain, her figure flat. Carl criticized the sprinkling of freckles, thin eyebrows, large nose, but none of these mattered. He could feel her voice reverberating within his ribs, and knew without a doubt the only woman he had ever loved was this homely teenage girl. "Sir?" Her small, thin hands were poised on the counter. Carl had time to notice the thin blue veins on her wrists, small emerald on her left hand, and the man's graduation ring she wore around her neck. "Pastries," Carl managed to say. "4, please." She picked up a square of wax paper and waited for his selection. 2 Napoleons, his voice was a croak, and 2 coronets. "Thank you," she said as he passed over the money. "Have a nice day." It was symptomatic of his deep distress that Carl actually considered getting to know her, though he'd seen almost at once that it was impossible. She was half his age, the age appalling thought of most of his students. She was physically unattractive. They would have nothing in common. And yet, there in the elite bakery, nearly toppled over from the heart-wrenching shock of recognition, that she should be there alone, that she was perhaps still sad and faithful, caused him intense pain, even though he was no longer the man she had loved. The fact was that he was now neither wholly Carl Larson nor Angela O'Neill, but an amalgamation of the two with the coherence of neither. Although he could diagnose an engine, he would never have worked as a mechanic. There were huge irrational gaps in his competence. At school, he remembered his subject and could manage the kids, but he found himself so restless with the school routine he resigned at the end of the first semester. Toward the end of the winter, out of work, depressed and confused, Carl called the hospital and asked to see Dr. Bourja urgently. "You are in pain?" The slow, inflectionless voice asked. "Not physical. I'm perfectly healthy. There are definitely side effects, psychological side effects." "Ah," said Dr. Bourja. It was amazing how much interest he could convey with one vowel. "My office calendar is booked for weeks. Could you stop by my apartment? On Pulaski Boulevard, number 1132. I'm in one of those renovated brownstones." Carl reached Pulaski just at sunset, amid the slush and ice of a late snowstorm. The sky was turning a gaudy gold pink above the thin crimson horizon. Though it was still cold and crisp, Carl was aware that the days were slowly lengthening. For some reason, that intimation of the change of seasons struck him as especially mysterious and poignant. Number 1132 had recently been renovated. The decorators had spruced up the lobby, installed elevators and good lights, improved the windows, and affixed alarms. But Dr. Bourja's second-floor apartment had eluded their ministrations. The doctor's rooms preserved their dark paneling, old rugs, crammed, untidy bookshelves. A single lamp with a dark green shade sat on the desk in his study. The high casement windows admitted a faint bluish light. Dr. Bourja motioned toward an elderly velvet sofa and eased himself into a big leather wing chair, where he was joined by a thin, gray tomcat. "You've turned my life into a bad novel," Carl said after the silence had matured. "Too many alternatives, all of them incomplete. Too many connections, some of them contradictory." Dr. Bourja listened patiently. "I did warn you," he said when he'd heard the whole story. "I did warn you." "I was desperate," Carl admitted. Dr. Bourja shrugged. "You knew," Carl accused him, "didn't you?" "I suspected. I did not know. The results of animal experiments are not always accurate indicators." His strong, heavy hands never stopped stroking the cat. "This is Alma. She's 30 years old." "That looks like a male cat," Carl said. "So it is. It is still Alma. She was struck by a car. Hopeless of recovery. This was a stray, gone feral. It was scheduled for experimental surgery." Dr. Bourja shrugged again. "One loves animals, too," he said. Carl felt a chill. "It is not a complete transfer. Alma was not such a good hunter. This one is more restless, but still. I expected you to tell me it was my imagination, that these were purely psychological effects," Carl said. "Please remember, I never deceived you. I told you there might be changes involving the brain. Otherwise, you would have died, like poor Angelo." After a moment, Carl said, "It was the stray whose spine was severed. The implant came from the pet that you were trying to save. Is that right?" "Understand, it is not possible to move directly from animal to human results." "You knew Angelo, though. You knew him." Carl suddenly had no doubt. "He was my godson, a great-nephew, actually. A young man of simplicity, joy, and charm. I can't believe you attempted it. He would have been left forever in my body." "I loved Angelo," Bourja observed. "He had great sweetness of temper. He might well have adapted. The alternative was that he was lost forever. You see, we both gambled." "With a marked deck. You know a hell of a lot more than I did." "It is unfortunate that you are a mathematician," Bourja said in a reflective tone. "You should have been a poet, a novelist. 2 lives, 2 families, an absolutely unique situation. It would have been a gift. But a man who loves precision and clarity is perhaps the worst choice of all. I am sorry about that." "And for the rest," Carl demanded, "you are alive and healthy. What have you told me but that you have now experienced new and finer emotions? By your own account, you've never been in love. By your behavior, I guess you have been selfish, reckless, and cold." "And you," Carl shouted, jumping to his feet. "What about you?" Dr. Bourja stroked the thin gray cat. "Love makes us do terrible things," he admitted. Carl was whipping down an old 2-lane, engine roaring, wind strong enough to rattle his teeth, leather jacket glued to his shoulders. The powerful vibration hurt his wrists, and the tension in his legs made the heel bone ache. He was out of shape, out of practice for a heavy and powerful bike, but he kept his speed up, burning down the straights, accelerating out of the curves, 10, 15, 20 miles above the limit, looking always for the slow farm tractor which would pull out suddenly, which would cause him to cross the line, which would settle everything once and for all. It was early spring. The road was damp. A watery sun came and went amid banks of clouds in a blue, white, and gray mackerel sky. Carl knew the tractor was up on a little farm road, or bouncing right out of a newly plowed field, just starting up in a barn. He tightened the accelerator again, because he didn't want to miss it. He should have died before, in the first accident. That had been his time. Although he had cheated death, his life had been wrecked anyway. He was sick of it. Ahead was a little hamlet with shops and businesses. Carl was still burning along when a blue hatchback swung out from a small market. He tightened his grip, ready to swerve around the car, and saw oncoming traffic and hit the brakes. The big bike's rear end slewed right and then left with a sickening wobble. Carl's arms and legs trembled with a strain as the bike skidded from the pavement to the asphalt shoulder, zipped around the hatchback, then bounced back on the roadway. Carl was drenched in sweat and trembling violently. He signaled a turn, pulled off at the next road, and stopped. It was on a rural residential street of ranch houses and tiny cottages with lawns that ran right down to the pavement. Carl loosened his helmet. A bird was singing with insistent and elaborate passion in a jumble of shrubs and vines, and a horse whinnied beyond the trees. Under everything was the broken hum of the highway. It came to Carl that he was not quite the same man. Of course, he'd known that in one sense. His old life was a shambles. But in another sense, he had not comprehended the changes until that moment, when he rushed toward death and resolution, found that he didn't necessarily want to find them. Carl felt the weak sun on his hands and face, and realized that the late Angelo O'Neill had once again saved his life.